Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we are super happy to have you here, and we just ask that you bring an open mind and heart to your listening experience and to be prepared to explore vantage points that I'm convinced will help shift or solidify your current understanding of the ultimate nature of reality in a way that is extremely empowering. Speaking of exploring powerful perspectives, I'm super excited to announce the release of my very first book, The Golden Key: Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance. If you're ready to alchemize the circumstances in your life so that your abundance expands to an entirely new level in 2021, head over to goldenkey.gift to download the audio or ebook as my gift to you by using the code POSITIVEHEAD. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Sadhu here with me on the show. Sadhu is a lifelong student of many disciplines, including the Theravada lineage, where he has studied under multiple masters in an effort to understand the inner door secrets of Thai Buddhist magic. And when I started to see what Sadhu was up to in the world, I was like, this is going to be an interesting show. Hello, Sadhu. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, man, you've got quite the journey you've been on from what I've uncovered, and I look forward to uncovering more today and learning more about the work that you're doing. I'd like to start with the same cliche opening question I always ask, and it is this: you're in an elevator. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I would say my passion is life and all that it encompasses, the good and the bad.
Yeah, and then that leads to the question, is there really good and bad? Or is it all experience and all happening for the greater good?
I would say it's a relative based on perspective.
That's right. I agree. Relative truths, right? Yes, that can be like you know, I always use this as my example of relative truths. You and I are separate. That is true. We can make an argument for that most people would agree with. There's another perspective that the consciousness that animates my form is the consciousness that animates your form. Separation is illusory in nature. Therefore, you and I are one. That is also true, depending on the vantage point from which we're speaking. So,
exactly. And even both can be true in the same space as well. Divine
dichotomy. Yes. Two apparently contradictory things that both hold true. And that's a whole journey. That's a whole episode in itself. So I want to learn a bit about your backstory. I know the listeners would love that too. It's always good to have some context for how someone, got on the path that they're on. And so whatever feels relevant to share.
I suppose there's many different elements I could approach, whether it was what got me into the paranormal work that I do and helping people afflicted by paranormal crisis, what led me on my journey of self-discovery and the monks that I met and traveled with and studied under, or even the various different teachers who unlocked me in different ways, culminating within a profound sense of self-awareness and higher states of consciousness that have been quite nice to live in. I would say at this moment right now, I feel drawn to just talk about how I met one of my first teachers that was in a Wiccan tradition. And for me, it was really interesting because I had already met Master Thanaful, who was one of the Theravada Buddhist monks that I'd been training under, and also met a High Lama Rinpoche, who is just so divine. I mean, being within his space and his master's space was intoxicating. It was like taking a drug, just being in their presence. Something very, very hard to wrap your mind around without experiencing. with Charlita, she was the mother of the Wiccan coven I became a high priest in, one of the various traditions that I've studied and kind of gone distance in. She taught
Mm-hmm.
me about the Hall of Doors. It was one of the first things that we started learning together. And it was this kind of guided meditation, you could call it, where we would be in a shavasana type position, laying like
Mm-hmm.
corpse pose. And
Mm-hmm.
she would have us do pranayam, breathing techniques. And then we would have this white light come into our body and wrap around us like a mummy. And then the next thing you know, you're astrally projected into this giant hall that you don't exactly know how you got into, but you know you're there.
Wow.
I uncovered 3 different past lives when I was in there. It was the first time I'd ever done any sort of past life regression. And it was a very profound experience for me because it showed me what past life regression is and what it isn't. The difference for me and what I'd heard and studied previous was, well, okay, you might remember this memory, or you might have this feeling or this sensation, or you were this person in this time exact, blah 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 blah. For me, I had really no idea where I was. I wasn't sure what the time period was. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sure like what continent I was even on. Um, it felt kind of like Mesopotamia if I had like to make a rough sort of guesstimate on it. It seemed like it was very old. The technology was very different than from what we have today, and I felt very like dirty when I walked outside, like I was in some sort of desert kind of environment, lots of dust and dirt and things that would get on the feet and the legs and body. And I had this weird, almost dreamlike sensation where I was able to look at my hands and my arms, and I was a part of this memory, but I had no context for what was going on. I knew by sensation that this person that I was interacting with had motherly like energy. So my mental association was, okay, is this my mother? But I didn't know. And there was little bits of conversation and pieces that would occur. And I had no concept of, what had happened or what was about to happen next. It was just little bits and pieces that would jump around. And that was what kind of gave me an understanding of, okay, this is a past life recall. And it was very vivid. One of the other things we got into pretty early on in our workings was she had these, she called them troll dolls, and they weren't like what you would think of in pop culture as like a troll doll. These were made in Georgia by a friend of hers who has a coven over there, and they take bits and pieces of wood and foliage, and they carve them and they turn them into like a resemblance of a troll, and they'll put them in front of a tree, and they'll put these gifts and things in front of the tree, and they'll ask a troll spirit to come and bless this doll. These dolls, I've seen it happen. They kind of placed one area in the house, and then next thing you know, they're somewhere else.
Oh, wow.
I had one that was a teacher troll, and it had little adornments on it that looked like a teacher, little book, glasses, things of that nature. And she was telling me they have very particular personality traits, and if they're not happy, they will act out. So I put this teacher troll in just one of the rooms in the house, and it would knock things over, and I would hear like bangs, and I'd go in there and something would be overturned, glasses would break, and I'm like, what the heck, man, like what am I doing wrong here? Well, no more behavior of that type occurred when I put it in my library area with all my books. That seemed to make it content. So I thought that was very interesting because its localized phenomena was very specific to like a child throwing a tantrum, like, hey, I don't want to be here. I know you have this other spot I prefer.
Wow. Wow. So that was that was some of your early experience with the paranormal, essentially.
Paranormal and magic kind of in combination. Yeah. Sometimes
Right.
the two are kind of hard to separate.
Gotcha. So interesting. But really the journey obviously was just beginning when you were starting to experience some of these things, right?
Oh yeah. When I was studying with Charlitha, that kind of showed me what could be possible. And once I kind of took the next step with Master Thanafol and Master Pongsak, that was when I started to realize the impossible. And one of the experiences I had pretty early on with Master Thanafol was he was giving me this Bodhi leaf. And I held this Bodhi leaf, and it was one of the first times that I had like touched a very holy relic. And I felt this sensation in my hand that kind of crept up, like if you've ever been given what would it be? Some sort of imaging scan when you go and get a medical test and they inject the copper dye in you and you get that sensation like you're about to wet yourself. But like you can feel that going in your veins. I felt this when I held this Bodhi leaf. And so I said, Master, why are these sensations going through my body? I can feel this like it's physical, but it's not physical. And he was explaining to me chi, and he was explaining to me energy is something to be experienced and felt. One cannot simply teach it and explain it. It's something that has to come from experience and development.
Experiential, yeah.
And what he explained to me he did that gave that Bodhi leaf such power and strength that was undeniable was he had meditated in front of this Bodhi tree with several other monks for, I believe it was a course of 4 or 5 days, where they drank no water, they ate no food, and they did not sleep. They just sat there in a meditative state, waiting for a leaf to fall off the tree. And
Wow.
Several leaves ended up falling off the tree, and then they took those leaves, and it had that collective power of that meditative consciousness imbued into it, as well as other monks who have meditated before that tree. And these became relics, whereas to some people, it would just be a leaf from a tree that fell.
Sure. Wow. That's pretty interesting. I've heard of that sort of thing before. I had a friend one time who was telling me about doing it was like a plant medicine journey all night where they just put, I forget the story exactly. It's been years since I heard it, but they just were like spent the whole evening, focused in this state, on some flowers or something. And then he went out, then they went out at the morning, after doing this all night, and released them into the ocean or something in some ceremonial way. And like going back a week later or whatever and seeing those identical flowers like come in on the wave. Like these flowers are not out in the ocean. You know what I mean? And if you put them in there a week ago, they're done, right?
Yeah, they're gone.
They're gone. It's the ocean, and this is some little fragile flower. And all of a sudden, there they are on the, on the water when you're back at the same spot a week later. Like, wow, that's really intense, right?
And there's a lot of very interesting things in regards of culminated energy within group circumstances, especially involving organic matter in nature that's naturally growing.
Yeah, I know that there's, I'd love to hear some. You mentioned to me before we turned on the recording some stuff about Thai Buddhist amulets, and it made me think of what is the book where the amulet appears? Do you know what I'm talking about? Shoot, I'm going blank on it right now. The super famous Yogananda.
Paramhansa Yogananda.
Yeah. In his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, there's like a whole thing where an amulet appears and materializes, and so I was curious. I instantly thought of that when you brought up the Thai Buddhist amulet, and if there's
it's an incredible book, by the way. I highly suggest any of your listeners who have not read that definitely give that a good read.
Steve Jobs he read that every year or something and would like give it away to everyone, from what I heard, something like that.
That's where I truly learned the power of words and the effect that they have on people when Paramhansa gave him his description with the blisters and how the words could create disease and illness in the body is super profound. But
Super profound, yeah.
in regards of Thai Buddhist amulets, it is huge in Thai culture. I mean, you got to take into account that over 90% of Thailand is Theravada Buddhist. I mean, you have San Fra Kum, which are all over Thailand, which are these like little spirit houses that have offerings and things like that inside of them, and it kind of appeases the local spirits of the land. And that's just a part of the everyday culture. They're outside of post offices and schools and government buildings. It's as common as seeing the American flag outside any business here. That
Wow.
you just don't think about it. It's just so common.
Wow.
One of my favorite types of amulets that I misunderstood at first is called Kumentang or Kumentang. There's a couple different ways to pronounce it and spell it, but it translates as Thailand's little golden boy. And what that is, at first I thought it was a very dark type of amulet, which, there is black magic that is done by certain lower order monks in Thailand, something kind of taboo that's not necessarily talked about commonly. But it's also practiced in some ways meaningfully, like with making a prey or lok prey, which is a human spirit that has been petitioned from a graveyard to come and live inside of an amulet, and the merit is shared between the owner of the amulet and the spirit itself. So the spirit will do things for you and will benefit your life and turn things in your favor. And in return, you're sharing your good deeds, your good merit with the spirit. You don't lose it. It's not taken from you, but it's a mutual sharing exchange. And then when the spirit eventually does reincarnate, it will have a higher reincarnation. It'll have certain samskars kind of, or spiritual patterns will be kind of lessened. Those grooves will be lessened when they come back. So it's a very mutually beneficial arrangement, and very, very interesting magical practice. The same is done with a hun peon. A hun peon is usually like a yarn wrapped type of stick figure that is used for like gambling and prosperity and wealth and finances. And the way they make them is they go to a graveyard and they will take an obituary and they will find somebody that was like a criminal, more so like a robber, that kind of individual, and they will go and they'll petition the spirit of the grave. And the monks are the ones who do this, not just like lay people. So they'll go in there and they'll essentially come with this spiritual contract of, hey, I know that you died maybe prematurely and the actions of your life were not necessarily in the highest. And if you would like to redeem yourself and have a better go in the next time that you return to this physical plane, this is something you can do now in your spiritual form that will prepare you for that better, more evolved life. And usually they're about it. With the Gumantong, though, the reason why I say they're kind of related in that same category, this used to be a very, very big practice. Technically, they're illegal. I may or may not own some of them. They used to take the aborted fetuses and miscarried babies from hospitals, and they would sell them or give them to the monasteries, and the monks would wrap them in a gold leaf after charring the bodies and reciting these mantras in a graveyard around like 2 a.m. There's like a whole entire drawn out ritual process for this. And they would also sometimes dig up the graves, and they would do this in the graveyard as well. And they would take this young child spirit and they would build the essence of this spirit up. So the monks would bestow divine power inside of this child spirit, and they would prepare the spirit to be able to interact within the physical world and to do things. They can be spiritual guardians. They can also like assist in gambling and many different things of that nature. And it's just really fascinating because it's not something you would think of in regards of an amulet. You would think of like a stone or a pendant. You wouldn't necessarily think of a charred corpse covered in gold leaf.
Wow. That's not the amulet I had in mind. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, especially when you hear Little Golden Boy, you're like, huh, what's that?
Yeah, right. Wow, what a trip, man. So you have how long did you have you studied? Been on this path, studying all this stuff, looking into Buddhist magic and so forth. How long has the journey been for you?
I would say about 10, maybe almost 11 years now.
Gotcha.
And it feels like so much longer and so much shorter at the same time.
Yeah, right. What is time anyway, right? So you have went through a series of initiations on that journey as well?
Yes, I have.
What does that entail?
Well, it depends greatly on the tradition. When I was doing the Wiccan initiation, it was more of a celebration of spirit and kind of joining in a group ritual that was kind of like going by the lunar cycles. And there were processes that I didn't necessarily understand at the time, but really it was just about connecting with Earth and connecting with Goddess and giving to the Earth what was given to me, like physical body, giving gifts back to the Earth, like fruits and flowers and oils and etc. So in that regard, that one wasn't so much weird as some of the other ones. When Lungpor Kak, which Lungpor means like Heavenly Father, it's like a saint. It's the highest level that you could reach as a Buddhist monk in a Theravada tradition, similar to like lamas and rinpoches. Rinpoche is like a much higher ranking in a sense, if we're gonna play that game of ranking.
Sure.
But when I got to interact with Lungpor Kak, which was Master Thanafol's master, so my grandmaster, there was a formal initiation of joining, being a lay person with magic, being prepared to become a Mofi, which a Mofi in Thai terms would be similar to what we would call a Native American shaman. So it's somebody that's involved between this world and the next and communicates with spirit and may do practices that involve what we would just call magic for simple terms. Lungpor Kak beat me with a straw broom. That was my initiation. And people would come to him and they would pay like lots of money and they would beg him, please, please bless my child, bless my children. And he would just, he would say these mantras in a very like aggressive and loud voice and just whack, 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 just like beating you on the head and the body. And I'm sitting there thinking, this has got to be some sort of joke. Like, there's no way this is like a blessing. And apparently it was like, it's a whole thing. Like, you have to be taught how to deliver it just right. Like, the broom itself is this charged, magical, consecrated object. But in my mind, I'm just like, I'm getting beat by like an elderly man with a broom. And they're saying this is my initiation. So there's been some weird ones, man. I couldn't really explain to you the depths behind that because I don't even know why that is a thing. But it was explained to me by Master Thanafol that it was like, it was a very sacred act. And it was something that I should be very grateful for. Still don't understand that one.
Yeah. Wow. That's funny, man. That's funny. So, yeah, like I said early on, I mean, what's so interesting about you is all the different things that you have explored. I know one of the things that have been involved with is exorcisms. I can't say I've ever had anyone on the show who has participated in an exorcism that I've known about. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that whole thing because I actually have a pretty wild story. I'll share it with you first, and longtime listeners probably know where I'm going to go right now. Years ago, I had. Are you familiar with Shaman Durek by any chance?
No, I am not.
Shaman Durek? Okay, so he's pretty well known, and like fourth generation shaman from a family from Africa, and pretty powerful figure. Has gotten a lot of press, I guess, in the last few years, and dates the Princess of Norway, as like his
Ooh.
partner. And he's just like, he's a very interesting, this, big black bisexual guy from, who's a shaman, seen so much multidimensionally, from Africa, dating from the whitest nation on earth, Norway, this princess, and therefore they've gotten a lot of like flack and like negative press in Europe and stuff. And so I know him pretty well. He's been on the show a few times, and I've been on his show. And the first time he came on, he started talking about possession, and I told him, and he claims to be able to perceive so much multidimensionally. Like I can tune into the guy down at the, gym right now, what he's wearing, what he's thinking. He's thinking about his business, or someone on the treadmill next to him doing this, and the first time he's on, he's kind of sharing some of this. And I'm like, I'm open, maybe so. I explore all the, it's not happening to me, but certainly open. And then he talked about possession. And I said, Dirk, I never really gave much credence to this idea of possession. Until I watched my child's mother, who went from being, just kind of like crazy, standard crazy chick vibes to, talking in a way, I am the queen of this universe. You will die when, for betray, very dark, speaking in Old English kind of vibes. And, a lot of, in me being very much, I guess, on the light spectrum in my present incarnation, helping a lot of people to shift their perspectives, running a show like Positive Head. It feels like we're like yin and yang almost, like two poles. And so I was telling him, I was like, yeah, I never really thought, much about it until I saw my child's mother go from just being pretty relatively normal to seeming like a possessed person and acting like and feeling like a different person than she used to be. And he said, oh, let me tap in and I'll tell you, so he does his thing and he goes, oh yeah. He's like, he goes into it in detail. He's like, oh, it's a Lavana spirit. And, Lavana, when she was in physical, would do this and torture people and did it. And does she, does your kid's mom cackle? Does she, he's doing all this stuff. If you go back in the archives and hear it, he just goes fully with it. Like, owning what he's claiming. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Maybe so. I'll never probably know whether this is or isn't true. And then I'm telling my son about it after the recording. I'm like, oh, you should listen to this episode. Your mom came up. He says she's, possessed by a Lavana spirit. And he looked at me and he goes, Dad, that's what she named my new sister. I'm like, oh, okay, Derek, one feather for your cap, like after the chills came, wore off. So, that was my first sort of crossing with seeing some level of evidence that there could be, something to this idea that I gave no credence at one point in my life. So, yeah, just curious what your experience and journey's been revolving around, possession or exorcisms.
I have witnessed many different possessions. I myself have been possessed a couple times during cases that I was on, and I've since gained much more protection, understanding, techniques, and application of things that have kind of assured me from what I encounter now that that's not going to happen again. A lot better prepared. But in the past, I have been possessed by what we would consider an angel, so like a higher vibrational celestial being. And it was actually very painful. It was very uncomfortable. It was like electric bliss, just shocking my entire nervous system. Very, very ungrounded, super spacey, like neurotic, just unable to really contain myself in a lot of mental regards. I felt incredibly manic. And this was like a divine spirit that meant me no harm, but like being within my physical vessel, my energies could not contain something that high vibrational. So it was a very painful experience for me. So that was really interesting to me because it's not what I thought it would have been like at all. Yeah. And I've been possessed by what some would consider demonic entities, which I just call anything a demon that is malevolent in nature, quasi-physical, and of malicious intent that's non-human. That tends to be a catch-all term for demons for me. I also was briefly possessed on a case by what I call a goat man, which was it was a corrupted fae type spirit. And I was trying to lure one of my masters deeper into the woods and intentionally throw him off. But it wasn't me in that sense. But he realized what was happening pretty damn quick and snapped me out of it and was like, go back to the car, let me handle this. And then he chased it off into the woods. And I was like, holy crap, that's not like, that's scary. So there's been a lot of really, really interesting experiences that I had that I almost don't really know which one to go into. So I'll kind of just give a basic explanation of like what possession is, and then I'll give you like a story of a student who screwed up royally, got people killed, and got his mother possessed. And it was a pretty serious case that I had to take care of that ended up bringing me to get involved twice. So the first thing that we have to understand is, you familiar with Ed and Lorraine Warren's work?
No.
Okay, so Ed and Lorraine Warren, Lorraine Warren was a famous psychic over here in the western side of the world, and her and her husband Ed ended up creating like a curio cabinet of various haunted artifacts, and they had like a museum, and they wrote books. They did so many different cases. They were more Catholic, but like the aspect of energy doesn't matter what the modality of delivery is as long as the energy is potent, correct? So they were able to apply those energetics into their forms of Catholic prayer and were able to help a lot of people. It was not necessarily the prayers, but it was the intention and the power behind those prayers that helped many people. They did thousands of cases. They're very, very famous. And they came up with this system called the 3 levels of possession, or how possession occurs, and that's infestation, oppression, and possession. One of the things that I kind of elaborated on within that structure was you have infestation, manifestation, oppression, transpossession, and then possession, and then perfect possession. So it's actually kind of more of like a 6-step process. And wraiths, so like a Lavana spirit, a wraith, a human spirit that has become the corrupted essence of its trauma and suffering, will also go by the same modality of approach that a demonic, quote unquote, spirit will take. And so when we get into transient possession, this is when an external force is in control for small periods of time. If someone says that they're possessed, and this most likely is not what's actually, or this is what's actually happening in regards to a fully possessed person being incapable of telling you of their possession. So when people are not really able to remember the episodes outside of the key possession moments, that's missing time, no knowledge of what happened, or limited knowledge of what happened. There's kind of like an external force that's plugged into their wind gate channel, if you want to use like Taoist Qigong terminology. So like in the back of the neck. So they're kind of like, they've got like this puppet master tendril in the back of the neck. Now, when they've fully integrated and become one with their host, think of like filling the heart chakra, the throat chakra, and the chakras up and down. They've kind of just snugly fit in like a glove. So, I mean, harder to break than just severing the point from the Wingate channel. Now, with a situation like what I had to do with my student, he came to me at a very interesting point in my life and my spiritual journey. At one point, I kind of got corrupted and lured by the dark side of things. And I had a lot of karma to resolve from that, and I've made my amends through that. But I ended up almost taking a book deal from E.A. Coetting from the Become a Living God Network. He's a chaos magician that practices in a lot of darker currents. I did work with Esben Kane. I did work with a Synth Mason. Jeffrey Duell, who I wouldn't necessarily consider to be like darker aligned. He's more of like a Norse magic practitioner that teaches like runes, and really cool guy. But I got involved with what you would call darker or lower orders. And because of my magical practice at that point, I was really really good and enticing with being able to apply some of the Buddhist magic and kind of like tweaking it into a more manipulative aspect for like control and power. And this is something I don't often talk about and share with people, but I feel like it's relevant here. So I was in a very confused part of my own journey, a dark night of the soul, if you will. And when I started to get out of that, and Master Thanaful brought me back into his good graces, and I was forgiven. Like that was the most humbling. I can't really even put that into words. I was let go like a lost son, you know. And then when I came home, I was fully embraced with nothing but forgiveness and love. And that was something that I'd never experienced before in my life, and it was very powerful for my change.
Prodigal son.
Exactly. I had my own experience. So when I came back, I was telling Master Thanaful, you know, I had gained some students that were really interested in some of the darker practices that I was teaching. And now that I'm no longer doing that, I don't want to associate or teach these students anymore. And he said to take this as a learning opportunity and a growing opportunity, and to explain to them honestly and sincerely that you no longer practice that, but if they still wish to learn from you, they can learn what you have to teach now. And I was actually amazed by how receptive some of them were. Some weren't interested, but some of them were. And Fred was one of them. He had practiced this ritual that I felt partially responsible for because I told him how to connect with this type of entity. I did not give him a full-blown ritual or tell him to do it. I was just kind of like, yeah, if you were going to do that, you know, this is a way to go about it. He actually did it and did it well, but it was something he should not have done, something I myself would not have done because I know how messy it would get. He ended up finishing this ritual around midnight, and around 12:30ish, his father ended up having a heart attack and passed away. And at that same time, within a 10-minute window of his father passing away from a heart attack, two of his cousins who were on opposite sides of town ended up getting in fatal head-on car crashes. And his mother started speaking in tongues and was cutting herself and inflicting self-harm on herself and repeating sentences in gibberish that made no sense while she was harming herself, and had to be involuntarily committed to a hospital. And he calls me, and he's very obviously emotionally upset. And he's like, I did this. I killed my father. I killed my cousins. I hurt my mother. And I'm like, okay, you know, stop for a second and breathe. All right. We are where we are. Let's get the full story here. Let's not jump to conclusions. And as he starts explaining things to me, I'm like, okay, shit, you did kill your father. You did kill your cousins, but not directly your hand. Still, you had to involve me in it. So let's do what we can do now, and that's let's help your mother. I ended up having to get him to sneak a video chat call while he was visiting with his mother, where I did what's called a swan dive. It's like a hypnosis technique where you fully associate and join in their fractured state of reality. It's very dangerous. Have you ever seen the movie with Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come?
Yes. Love that movie.
You remember how Robin Williams descends down into hell and he joins his wife?
I'm getting chills.
Yeah, I'm getting chills right now talking about it. And he joins her in that delusion, and he's like, okay, you know, we can be here together.
If I can't pull you out of hell, then I'm going to just join you because I love you so much.
Exactly. And reality starts crumbling around him, and he gets those moments where, you know, he's there, he's lucid, but then there's these little breaks in his own reality where he's like, you know, turning, he's like, what? You know, like, did you hear that? And like, you know, he's starting to lose grip on things because he was down there too long. And he ends up, you know, being able to bring her out. It's like, you know, incredible.
Actually, his love brought her out.
Yes,
I don't want to ruin the movie. But see the movie if you haven't seen it. It's good.
It's still good,
yeah,
even if you're
his
hearing
willingness
about this.
to sacrifice himself brings her out of the breaks her out of this hell that they, you know, up until that point, and you know, the spirits were like, there's no saving someone where she's at, and
exactly
his willingness to go down with her brought her out. Before we continue on with today's episode, I'd like to take a moment to share an exciting new development in my world that can benefit those of you who are ready to get out there and travel. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, at some point you have most likely heard me talk about my personal hero's journey tale regarding the Inc. fastest growing private travel company I co-founded that imploded back in 2015. Well, out of the ashes of that challenging lesson, my brother and I started a new travel company called Hello Vacay. And an exciting new chapter has just unfolded in my travel company saga as Hello Vacay recently secured a huge partnership with the world's largest online travel agency, Priceline. Essentially, due to our past success working with them all those years ago, they have agreed to give us access to their deeply discounted private wholesale booking rates. Our new site, hellovacay.com, is sort of like the Costco for hotel and alternate accommodations because it allows anyone to get access to these wholesale rates, which are up to 50% off the normal booking rates you'll find on all the other major online travel sites. The only caveat is that Priceline won't let us display these rates publicly because they are so much lower than even what you would see at Priceline.com. So to offer them, they insisted that we have a paid membership for people to get access to these much lower rates. And since I appreciate all of your ongoing support as I've continued to share the updates on my entrepreneurial journey over the years, I originally announced that we would give you all 50% off the normal membership fee of $79 a year. However, after talking to my brother more about it, I convinced him to give all of you 100% free access for the first year when you go to hellovacay.com and use the code PHFreeYear at checkout for the yearly plan. And be sure to choose the yearly plan, not monthly, when you're signing up to get the full free year access. Once you're a member, you'll see that the discounts vary from city to city and season to season. But if you're traveling with any regularity, your savings will easily add up to hundreds or even thousands of dollars a year. I personally saved over $200 in one weekend when I went to Seattle not too long ago. Also, I'm honestly not sure how long my brother will agree to allow me to run this free year offer. So if you plan to travel at all in the coming year, be sure to go to hellovacay.com, spelled HELLOVACAY.com, and use the code PHFreeYear to take advantage and get free access to wholesale travel booking rates. Journey well, everyone.
My master who taught me the swan dive protocol actually had only used it twice before and said that he personally would never use it again unless it was a last ditch, technique that he had to do. And he was very adamant about never using it. And I didn't see any other way of forcing rapport and connecting with this person. So I joined in the delusion. I joined in the madness. I rolled around and bathed in it. And it was a very uncomfortable experience. It was like splintering thoughts that just shattered every time you thought a thought. It became a million thoughts. And I don't really know how to verbalize it, but the definition of madness for me, honestly, it was terrifying. And I don't know how I found my way back. I'm still not quite sure of that. I don't really have an honest answer for you there, but ended up bringing her out of it. And then she was fine for a little while. We'd done some remedy ritual work, me and Fred, and we ended up getting things sent back where they needed to be. We crossed over the spirits of his family members that became deceased through that whole experience. And we did a lot of amends work in a spiritual way. And then she kind of came back into it. And I had to go in again. And this time it was much lesser because I had broken the hold significantly. And after that point, she's been fine ever since. But it was really interesting because after everything was done and she was brought back the first time, that night, Fred had something like written on his car, and it was like written in snow. And I was like, well, let me see that. And it was like upside down, it turns out. It was like these weird symbols. And so I have a psychic friend of mine who does a lot of work with elementals, and she is really, really good at that. And she was saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Like that's water elemental language." And I was like, "Okay, like what would that be doing in correlation with this?" And sometimes some spirits will communicate and do favors for other spirits, kind of a thing. And it said, she said it translates as headshot, and I was like, "That's kind of weird." And she's like, "Does that mean anything to you?" And I was like, "No, honestly not." And then like a day later, I was sitting in my chair and I got this just boom right in the back of my head and a splitting migraine. And
Wow.
when I kind of like went into meditative state to kind of feel and identify what those ripples were and the funnel of where it kind of came from, I'm sure Shaman Dirk would kind of know more of what I'm talking about there. So I was kind of able to trace it out, and I had this confrontation with a spirit who was just kind of like in my face, and he was like, "This is because of your student. He wouldn't listen to me. He couldn't hear me. So I'm talking to you because you can hear me and you can see me." And I'm just like, dude, I had nothing to do with this. I'm actually helping clean this up, and I'm taking responsibility for my student now, but like it didn't need to come at me with this quote unquote headshot. And when I had went and I told Chella, the psychic that had kind of transcribed this message for me, and I explained the whole experience of what happened, she said, "You're very fortunate that you're energetically where you are, because if this had been your student, he would have had a brain aneurysm and he would have just dropped dead and nobody would have known why." So,
Wow.
yeah, I've had some just really bizarre things occur and happen that, unless you have familiarity with this type of work and the weird, as I call it, these just sound like really interesting stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If you haven't had something, really significant happen, it's kind of like, yeah, right. I don't know, And then once something happens that is like, sort of, exposes another side of reality, it's like, oh, hold think of people who have like profound UFO experiences or whatever, from
Right.
one day, like, no, like, yeah, that's all BS too. Oh my god, I was sitting at the top of the hill, like my friend who used to be a cop, sitting at the top of the hill, and all of a sudden there's a craft there and my car shuts down, and like, like, what in the world? It's so impactful and profound, it just shakes the fabric of known reality, right?
I did Celestial Qigong with James Gilliland at the Gilliland Ranch with the ESETI organization.
Oh,
I don't
cool.
know if you're
I've
familiar
heard
with
of
his
this.
work.
I've heard of it. Yeah, yeah.
Some really interesting phenomena occurs on that ranch. They
Yeah.
regularly have, how do you put it, men in suits that kind of hang around the edges of the property and have had to be like chased off and reminded that it's illegal for them to trespass on that land.
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying.
Wow. Wow. What a trip, man. It's yeah, I've heard a little bit about that place. So you
Yeah,
were there,
and
huh?
yes, I live in Washington State, so going down there was like maybe I want to say about a 5 hour drive from where I live. I'm up in the Bellingham area, so close to the Canadian
Mhm.
border.
Mhm. Gotcha.
And Dr.
Wow.
Stephen Greer as well, his work. I did some
Yeah.
remote viewing courses with him. Really phenomenal. I was never big into the whole alien thing, just because I'm a man of experience, and I often will put the burden of proof on people,
Mhm.
and that's how I ended up believing in ghosts and things like that. It's just something undeniable to me at this point.
Yeah.
That kind of became the case with aliens. I wouldn't say all aliens or all manners of how things kind of play out with abductions and etc. But I do know I saw very unexplainable things in the sky that are unlike any aircraft or anything I've ever seen before when I was at the James Gilliland Ranch. And I know that Dr. Stephen Greer and some of the like the Sirius film he had, Sirius, and what he shows and teaches in some of his classes that he provides.
Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, his new one as well, is pretty interesting.
He is a very intelligent man. He has a prestigious reputation. I believe him. I've seen some proof that he's provided that is believable to me and satisfies my burden of proof. And I would definitely suggest anyone interested in UFOs or aliens, James Gilliland, ESETI organization, and Dr. Stephen Greer, familiarize yourself with their work.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Well, you've shared quite a few stories. I always love us. That's what is awesome about this episode with you, because fascinating stories that sort of show these other parts of reality just are so intriguing. And I always go to as we get towards the end of an episode, asking for a story of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story. And I feel like you've definitely already qualified the question. But I don't know if you have any other like stories or experiences that you'd care to share that you think would be fun and relevant.
Yeah, I had this one instance where I was doing a paranormal case, and one of the more lighthearted kind of stories that I had was this woman who had contacted me. I still don't know who actually referred her. I get a lot of those referrals these days where someone's just, oh yeah, Sadhu da, I was told that you might be able to help me with this problem. And they'll reach out to me, and it'll definitely be something worth my attention, and I'll take care of it. And this lady had come to me, and she had a very tragic story about how her 5-year-old son had drowned in the family pool over 30 years ago. And, this woman was like in her 70s, at this point. And she was telling me just how her other son had struggled with depression his whole life because, he was supposed to be watching the brother. And, I truly believe from everything I gathered that no one was really at fault. Accidents and things like that happen sometimes. And it's incredibly tragic, but that is life. So he kind of really, really internalized it. And he blamed himself. He became an alcoholic. He became a drug addict. And every time he would get completely loaded, it was the only time where he wouldn't see his brother's face standing in the corner, dripping wet. And I can only imagine how horrifying and traumatic that would be of an experience, having to get so drunk or high just so you don't see your dead brother who you blame yourself for drowning, just standing there, just dripping wet, looking at you with judgment. And unfortunately, the son had kind of started to become a wraith. He started to become like the corrupted essence and was pretty much on the verge of a full transition, but I was able to kind of snap him out of it. And I explained to him how much his family truly loved him and how none of this was ever meant to happen, but it did happen. And we have a say over what happens next. And that's being able to cross over and not knowing what that transition is going to be like. But that's how his life would have been if he had lived a full physical life either. No idea what job he would have done, what would have happened to him here. And then this is just the same thing, but without a physical body. And was able to give him some closure and peace. And I crossed him over. And then I got like a very sincere thank you from the mother. And she was saying that that she had the dream the following night where he had come before her. And she said that when she woke up, on her bed, there was a red rose laying on the bed. Like, whoa. And there was no explanation for it being there, but there was a red rose on her bed. And that's what like made it even more powerful for her, because the dream was just so vivid and so real. And, she got to have this powerful closure. And what made it like more heartwarming and touching to me was I wasn't really paying attention to kind of like the date and stuff like that. But that morning that she woke up and the rose was on her bed, it was Mother's Day. And
Oh,
she had
wow.
this rose on her bed, and she told me, it's still out of all the really touching experiences I've had, this one kind of has a really special place in my heart. And she had told me, I still have it saved and screenshotted that message. She said, I just want to thank you for giving me the most beautiful Mother's Day gift that anyone could have
Wow.
possibly given me. And that meant so much to me. And I thought that was like such a tragic situation, but it had such a beautiful resolution. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I
all you
love
could
it.
really hope for, is like the best outcome. Her son wasn't going to be able to come back, but it
Yep.
could be healthy closure.
Yeah, it's that is really all we can hope for. And I for one am optimistic that, all the sad stories and all the tragedies and all the, challenge that life can bring is leading to a beautiful resolution at some point, this life or beyond, where it all makes sense as to why, and it's happening for love, at the end of the day. And I fully believe that, and it brings me a lot of peace when I see things that, it's like, oh, that's somewhere in the process. Just like it's very ugly for the, caterpillar as it's melting into a goo, turning into a butterfly. If you're judging it based off of a certain, snapshot of its process, it's awful, right? And but it's what it takes for it to transition into this next phase of its evolution.
Right. It reminds me of a quote. I remember people saying this was Einstein, but I don't know that Einstein actually said this. But
Mm-hmm.
it was, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you'll always think it's stupid. And I
Yep,
don't
yep,
know
yep.
why that quote just specifically kind of came to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Totally. It's like this very, and this is really kind of circling back to what we started off talking about. Is there good or bad? Well, if it's all happening, if we're divine, eternal beings that are love at our essence, but you need, there is no light without darkness. You've never seen a
right.
great work of art. You've never seen a great work of art without shadow in it. And so once you start to realize, like, these tragedies and hardships and struggles are a tool that God, source, higher self, the universe, consciousness is using in order to know itself, right? And that to me is the truly the essence of what this crazy dance is all about.
Well, one of my strongest gifts is my empathic ability, and um, I'm not clairvoyant, but my empathic ability is so strong that I can feel so deeply I can see, if that makes any
Mm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of understand, in my perspective, the concept of love as this powerful pulsing vibration. It's so uh, huge and just magnificent and glorious and divine. But in order for us to comprehend this amazing quality of love, we have to understand that it's a vibration. And as we span farther and farther down this vibration, the ripples get smaller and smaller. And the only way we can make the distinction of love vibrationally from other vibrations is because there is an ending connection point. And
Mm.
so that darkness that tethers off of love is still very much so a part of love. That space
Mm.
that holds for love to inhabit, or that surrounds where love is not, is still love. If that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way you have painted that picture. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So, for those who would like to continue to follow your work or connect or any of those things, what's the best way for them to do it?
You can check out my website, www.thesadhudah.com, and that's TheSadhudah.com.
Cool. I do have one last question for you, my friend, and it is this: We got a cliche opener and a cliche closer. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Sadhu?
The meaning of life for me is when you go to do a very simple case of crossing a ghost and you find that this ghost had an obsession with onion rings and you've always hated onion rings, but you let that ghost sit on your crown chakra. You find yourself craving onion rings. You go and you eat those onion rings. You love them. And then you cross this ghost and forevermore, all of a sudden you love onion rings.
That may be one of the best answers I ever got. What's funny? You know what's funny about that? I am like the most non-picky person for food, primarily, except for one thing: onions. I'm cursed by onions because they're in everything.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I'll throw people sometimes because onion rings actually don't taste like onions to me, and they're kind of good. That's like the one area where I'll like, my family will be like, oh, hold on, you're eating onion rings? Like what? You hate onions, So that's a great story for me. I love it.
Hey, texture and flavor can change everything.
That's for sure, man. That's for sure. Well, Sadhu, this has been awesome. You are such an interesting character, and I am glad that you flickered into the frame of my movie. And I know everyone out there has enjoyed this as well. Thank you guys for tuning your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts into this episode. Till next time, journey well, everyone. Also, before we sign off, I wanted to remind you to download the Golden Key audio or ebook as my free gift to you at goldenkey.gift using the Golden Key code POSITIVEHEAD. And please, if you enjoy my gift, leave a positive review on Amazon.